Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for tuning into my conversations, bridging arts, culture, and community. Do remember to follow us on Instagram, where you can see clips from the podcast, some insights, and much, much more. That's Truth in This Art on Instagram. Today, I am super excited to welcome my next guest, a special guest. She's an independent curator, creative producer, longtime museum professional, and a former human rights lawyer from Venezuela. Her career includes impactful work with multiple Smithsonian museums, the Washington Project for the Arts, and Times Square Arts. Please welcome Fabiola R. Delgado. Welcome to the podcast.
Yay, thank you.
So thank you for coming on. I feel like it's just natural. So thank you for coming on, joining the conversation. And before we get into the sort of deeper questions, the more introspective questions, could you share a bit about yourself, more about your sort of art experience? I find I'll ask these questions. I start off introducing the person, ask these questions, and I'm basing it on a bio. Right. And I want to get, the sort of art experience, but I'm very curious about sort of, your bio, who you are, like what part of that bio is like left out, because I have, museum professional, I have curator, I have former human rights lawyer and Venezuela. So give us a bit about, your background and sort of one of those things that's left out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. My name is Fabiola R. Delgado, R. Delgado. I kind of switch if I'm speaking in Spanish or in English. And you are right. I mean, thank you for doing the research. I am a former human rights lawyer. I turned into an art curator, a creative producer, independently. And I make sure to clarify this transition because it's a huge part of me, just like being Venezuelan is a huge part of me. And I don't think I'll ever not be it. I've been in the US for about 13 years. It'll be 13 years in August. And I came here to request political asylum. And I'm still in that legal limbo in a way. So yeah, Venezuelan, human rights lawyer, turned into a curator. I think that's a huge part of, who I am and my perspective, and it informs a lot of the work that I do. So, coming to the US, of all places, to request political asylum for my engagement in human rights activism, political activism back home. I don't know if you know, but I used to work for Amnesty International back in Venezuela. I was the regional manager of my chapter, or the chapter of the organization in my region in Carabobo. But one thing that's not typically in my bios online or professional, but that do come up in conversation, is the fact that I was a nanny for half of my time in the US. I've been here nearly 13 years, and about 7 or more than half so far. I was a nanny before even jumping into, from law to the art world. And I think that is also a huge part of me and my practice and the things that I value. Also understanding invisible labor and being an immigrant and a domestic worker, coming and not having documents, at first, having to navigate a system that's difficult on purpose and by design. And suddenly I'm like, well, but I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm prepared. I know all this stuff. Why is it so difficult? I'm smart. And then I know English. I didn't come even, without the language. I already knew English before I moved here. I definitely got better at it. And still it was just so difficult. And very lucky and very fortunate to have met people along the way that have helped me and let me stay, in their house for free and giving me jobs, even if I didn't have a working document, or, help me really pave the way, because you can't do it alone.
Wow. I mean, you mentioned sort of nearly 13 years, and it's been it's being able to, one, keep who you are, who your identity, and really be, hold on to that, grasp onto that, because that's important. And, as I was going over the research and going over your background, it's just no, that's absolutely a big part of one's identity and really holding on to that. So bravo to you for one, because like this notion of like, it's 13 years, it's kind of a gray area, that's it's not great. It's not great. And then also sort of having that background in the nanny part. I'm glad you I had no idea.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of hard to find online. I tell you, like, you find me on YouTube. I'm like, oh yeah, I also used to be a singer. I used to have bands all over. I played in a bunch of bars all over DC. I used to collect mugs from all the venues where I sang. So that's where I had my tea, and this is like a little souvenir. But yeah, the nannying part, nobody, if you get to know me, you know that.
Yeah.
And I'm really close to the last kids that I nannied, Lila and Josie. They're like my nieces at this point. When I was, full-timing, we were all in understanding, mom, dad, and fa, like we're all co-parenting. And funnily enough, they're both lawyers too. So it's like these kids are growing up to be like justice fighters and activists, and they're like all about fairness, and they can call, stuff out. I don't know if I can swear. So
No, no, it's
call
absolutely.
shit
And
out.
thank you. Thank you. We wanted to be as honest and as real as possible. And again, this idea around sort of, what we do, how we navigate sort of these different things that are there. And again, the activism thing, like we talk about these things here that feel like they're activism, but when someone's coming here and it's like, living here, being here for a very long time, big chunk of your life, you've been here. It's like that's the work I'm actually interested in, like what that journey looks like versus like, oh yeah, I didn't get this one grant and now I'm an activist. It's like, all right, sure, I'm one too. Um, and then the perseverance that's there. So shout out to you, like, again, and talk a bit about, because I'm very curious when I hear, law background, specifically in like, human rights, and then sort of, the trajectory and going into arts and curation and being that art pusher. I saw that. I saw that, So talk about sort of like what influence moving into more of the creative space more and spending more time in that area.
Yeah, well, I've always had a deep appreciation for the arts in all of its forms. I grew up singing, I grew up dancing. I was on stage a lot. I like, was in competitions representing my school. And so I think music is definitely like my first love. My mom, Adriana, she has exquisite taste in music. And I only realize it now as an adult. Sometimes as a kid, you're like, this is not that good. I'm like, oh my God, this was amazing. So I'm really glad that I had her influence. Also, I mean, there's a lot of singer, women in my family, are and were my aunts, my cousins. And so like that livelihood and that, it was also normal. It wasn't special. They weren't like a professional singer for something like, they sang at churches, they sang with, their Afro, Zulian, groups, and just in the house all the time. And I think artists just find each other. You gravitate towards the other creatives, the weirdos. I recently wrote a blog about like the importance of having weird friends. And it was about that, the weird, the artists, the creative friends, because like they really push you to be the most you can be. Another influence is my dad. He's technically my stepdad, but he's part of our family. Since I was a teenager, he really, Vito took the role of dad. My biological father was not a great one. And we're lucky to have escaped this violent, abusive cycle. And Vito, has been a really wonderful father figure. And he was back in Venezuela, he was a frame maker. So he used to frame artworks for all the artists in the city. He had a little, very little gallery in Valencia where I, mostly grew up. And, just seeing him interact with artists, seeing, some experimental, some like more emerging, some more like established or recognized was really fascinating. And that was, he also taught me the value of a story. And I remember him always saying like, art is not a necessity in the way that food is a necessity, or water, or even money. Like you need a job because then you need like, these things that you need. Otherwise, you cannot live in society. art is not that kind of a necessity. It's for the soul. It's for beauty. It's for, it's still a necessity, but like in a different hierarchy in whatever Maslow's or whatever pyramid.
Yeah.
And the value of the story is like, some artwork, yes, you count the hours that you put in, the materials, all of that has a specific price, but
Mm.
the value, some stuff is priceless just because you can create such a deep connection with it. And yeah, storytelling does come from that. Also, yeah, from all my friends, and I guess my own, interest in art and activism. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was like 6 years old because I
Yeah.
wanted to sue my dad for like all the shit he put us through. And and like I know I can sue him. I know he owes us money. I know that, he should go to jail. Like, ah. So very feisty. And then growing up, Venezuela started getting more and more totalitarian, and it became more of a dictatorial, state. And suddenly I see him like, oh my gosh, I need to also fight for my country. Like I gotta, save something.
Yeah.
And artists usually are, the strongest voices or the most free
Yeah.
voices, because you're like, there's like a need again, or like an impetus for expressing, your emotions, for putting a mirror on society and again, calling shit out.
Yeah.
Um, and so all of that has really turned into like a melange, a whole mix of like, I always wanted to work in the arts. I was in the circus. That's also not in my bio, but I used to be a circus performer. I was in the first and only gospel choir in my country. Like I've always been part of these communities
Yeah.
and mixed it always with the human rights, working with Amnesty, doing campaigns, having concerts, organizing events. Like this is a way that I can talk to people about important issues and, call attention to our government, to other, private citizens, to, institutions and corporations. But I can do it in a fun way, in a creative way, and it's less intimidating then, because then I'm not like, well, I'm a lawyer and like, let me tell you all the things that are wrong. It's like, we're gonna have a concert, and in between songs we're gonna have conversations, and some of these songs you should listen to the lyrics. So yeah, all of that is part of what influences me.
Wow. Again, hearing that and hearing that sort of background, that, that ever changing, ever developing background, I'm getting more and more pieces of it. More of the onion is being peeled. Um, yeah, like, I do this when I talk to folks, like, one, people think like, oh, you just do a podcast, you're just a media person. It's like, I'm a data analyst by day, and having that sort of mindset, and I try to find ways where they connect, and then hearing you really break down and describe sort of these different parts that make up your background in your life. And I'm sure there's going to be another one that comes out like, Rob, one time I was a
Like
boxer.
also another, yeah.
But yeah, it's great to see where they connect. And, as you were describing a second ago, of like, yeah, these are these great songs, but let's have some conversation and like why this matters, why this connects. That aids in the storytelling. I think that's really powerful and really important. And what I'm gathering as we kind of shift into a bit of like sort of your more current work, I I think that there's this advocacy there, obviously, where we have folks who are making art that may not always get those sort of opportunities, those sort of sterling opportunities. And that's really, really something that interests me, because that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And, I speak to a lot of different people. And I remember doing an interview a couple years ago with Terrell Telford. And it was just like the underrepresented and unrepresented communities. That's sort of what it is. And folks will tell me, oh, you should just really focus in this area and that area. It's like, I think I got this. You know what I mean? So could you talk a bit about your current work, and is it, accurate as far as what I was touching on of some of the folks you're working with?
Yes, so as a curator now, as this current life that I'm, living, as an independent curator, creative producer, um, what I really enjoy, I think the thing that makes me most exciting is the storytelling aspect of it. And I think I find storytelling is quite the essence. Again, coming from a country where, there's not really a lot of freedom of expression. You go to prison or you end up dead if you speak against the government. Or, I mean, I was almost, again, that's another thing. It's like I was almost thrown in jail. I've been kidnapped. I've been, persecuted. That's why I came to request political asylum. It's just so difficult. And there's like a choking sensation of like, I want to say something. And if I say something, the consequence can be really bad for me or for my family. Artists usually just break through and they don't care. I'm in the cusp. I'm like, I'm not an artist. I'm an art pusher. Like I want to work with artists and like through my voice, through my singing, I definitely did a lot of that. But there's still just such a risk. And when my mom tells me, just stop, like don't come back, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get quiet for a bit because I don't want her to, get hurt. But, that definitely informs my practice today. And so I see storytelling, as a curator, I feel like artists tell stories through their work and curators tell stories through the artist's work. Because that way I can, amplify the voices, as you're mentioning, people that are marginalized that often, get the mic. It's like, this is a way in which I can organize and bring different voices that may not have, the mic all the time and amplify them, build platforms for them. Every time if I have access to an institution, I'm like, I'm opening the door. Like there's more people that come in here. Doing it independently is a little bit different, but still I'm like, oh, now I can actually work in the stories that I want to work with, the people that I want to, work with. And through curation, I also understand a lot of myself. Like it's been very therapeutic and I've been able to understand and process a lot of my own, traumas and wounds. Usually that one of like not being able to speak, like, oh, I can express myself through the works of others. They get me in some way. And that's something really beautiful that art does, because even though it can be so personal, so intimate, it resonates with people. Everybody has a shared story of pain or joy or whatever it is. Like you can read it and then we can have a really interesting dialogue. So yes, that's mostly what I do.
Thank you. Thank you. And I was gathering that. I wanted to give you the mic and have you share your story and your and your words, what have you. And thank you because again, I always go back into the sort of purpose of doing this and you being based in DC, the sort of I guess start and basis of that was a response to someone who is a felon now who was living in DC and that notion of Trump talking about these places that have folks that are black and brown folks and just kind of crapping on those places, crapping on what I don't think is the streets or the lights. I think it's the people in those places and these very inflammatory and really damaging and harmful things that were being said for now 4+ years. And so for me, thinking like, all right, folks have stories as you're touching on and being able to share like what really happens in a place. That's the thing that really interests me. And I think being able to share those stories through mostly artists, mostly creative folks. And, a lot of times I'll hear from people, no one's ever thought I was an artist. No one ever thought my work mattered. And I'm like, well, I think your work's interesting. Get to talk
Yeah.
about it. And it's just something that like a bulb that goes off on people. It's like, wow, someone's actually leaning in and using, sort of their platform, if you will, to help amplify what I do. That's the exchange.
Yeah.
But for me, I think, and I think there's always some sort of challenge when you're doing things. And I love the thing you said earlier about being around the weirdos. I love the weirdos. I'm one of the weirdos.
Yes.
But there are challenges, like obviously, as an independent, right? So you're an independent curator. I'm an independent podcaster. There's no network behind me and any of that stuff. And a
Yeah.
lot of times, independent, like one person will have
Yeah.
you. Could you speak on some of the like unique challenges and rewards of being in that independent path?
Yeah. Well, let's start with, I mean, the challenges are always usually surrounding money, finances, it's a shame that, and sometimes I'm surprised. I'm like, oh, like there's no like Department of Culture, there's the NEA, there's some organizations that are like pseudo governmental. They're there like floating, and they do a lot of help. Like they do serve a great purpose,
Sure.
but it's not like established. Like, why is it not in the Constitution? Like, why are we not supporting the arts in all of, their ways, in like a more systemic, way, at least in this country. And in general, around the world, the arts are still, not seen as a viable career. There's like all these perceptions that it's, you're not going to make money, blah, blah, blah. And it like kind of perpetuates the cycle of like, well, if you invest in it, then we can't make money off of it. Like, people sell like there's an art market, like there's a way in which it, functions or dysfunctions sometimes the art world. But, the investment and like resources are necessary. And also, speaking of the systemic inequalities or inequities, I people don't have all, different people don't all have the same starting point or the same, networks, the same abilities. I think everybody has the same capacity, but not the same, know-how.
Yeah.
And so even investing in particular, communities, people of color, immigrants, Black folks, like, okay, well, let's divert some money and like focus it on here. Because like it's not gonna be like, oh, well, it's not equal. Like, no, it's not equal, but
Yeah.
it's equitable. Like, I always think of like, justice is my main goal. And I thought that justice, as a kid, I thought justice meant being a lawyer, being a judge, like going to court, like that's what justice is. And through law school, I made it, not immediately, but like it took a few years of like, I don't think this is going to work. The country's not going to get better. Whatever I do might end up, killing me or putting me in jail. I like, is it worth it? And I think it is. Um, I think we definitely need more lawyers and human rights lawyers. People was like, oh, why did you quit? Human rights, like we need more of you. Like we need people who want to do that.
Yeah.
And they are so passionate and obsessed with it that they like will go to, their last resort to like find justice. And here I've been able to like, oh, I think there are other ways of finding justice. And it could be through the arts and is, studying history, working in museums, which also like somehow I found myself within the Smithsonian, which was beyond a dream. I couldn't even imagine that I could work at the Smithsonian. When I was younger, I can seem like, wow, like doing an exhibition and writing this history and, it's going to go through generations. There's going to be an archive of what's happening. You need to have a fair, outcome.
Yeah.
Life, and you need to be able to integrate different perspectives, because otherwise you're just like, is history just never going to be fair? Like, no. So yeah, it's not really about like, how do we do, like you need to add everything. It's never going to be perfect. It's like utopia, like the goal is going to keep moving forward and forward. But if you center justice, if you want justice at the center, being restorative, being reparational, being like trying to fix past mistakes, will help us in the present and will help us in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I like the point you were making earlier around like what's equitable and what's equality, right? And I remember, and it kind of dovetails on that point I was joking about earlier about, yeah, I'm an activist because I didn't get that grant. It's that thing where I remember that how messaging gets sullied because of how like social media and all works, right? And we have these like sort of social media advocacy and things of that nature. And it's just, for simplicity, brevity's sake, and these are deeper issues. These are more systemic issues. These are old issues that have been around for a long time. And I remember, the talk around defund the police. I was like, let's actually put the full thing in there. It's defund and reallocate. Let's take the money from there and put it
Yeah.
in these other places. And I recently went back in and dove into this book, Death of the Artist. And, I remember one thing that stuck out, you mentioned NEA and NEH, right? And, something about like since the peak of funding that the NEH had, I believe, it was just like we're now down to like 47 cent. And this is as 2020. So it's
Mm,
probably even lower now, 47 cent per person in the US dedicated towards art. So in it, that notion almost turns into how we look at films, right? Like, oh, this didn't hit the mark. We didn't make that billion off of it. So
yeah,
they're only investing in these things that look like large wins. And the other thing I'll say is the archival thing, the storytelling thing. We can look at it in live and in color. You can look at something from 5 years ago, and we've already rebranded what the actual story was, but we were all around then to know exactly what was happening. So
yeah,
something like this and something that has like work being covered and folks like you being in the Smithsonian and the work that you're doing, that's important because the sort of the truth and the documentation and the archival around that will be changed because the winners get to write the story.
exactly. So yeah, that's definitely a huge challenge, and like that's kind of what we have to, continue doing this work and continue advocating for the reallocation of funds, of the expansion or investment into different, communities. To even, as an independent curator right now, I'm like, okay, maybe I don't have a lot of money, but I'm going to have a show, and I'm going to invite people that haven't had a show before, that maybe are not selling. How can we make room for everybody? Because there's definitely room. There's definitely resources. We just need to be more intentional about them. So that was the challenge. And you also asked like, oh, like some of the good things, like what do you like? And I do like the independent part. It's also the scarier part, because I don't have like a salary. It's not the most stable of situations, but I'm able to select. Like, well, I'm gonna be intentional. I'm like, I want to work with this artist, and we're gonna find a way. I may not get a grant. Maybe I will. Maybe, I put a little bit of my own money. Like, we'll figure something out. But having that agency and being able to work with people who are also very excited and exciting and encouraging and coming up with like interesting, theories and ideas, or stuff that, maybe just doesn't get as shown in galleries. I'm like, oh, well, we're going to do it because I don't have a board, above my head. I don't have an agenda. I don't have a museum, director and all these people right now to like tell me, okay, well, this is the strategy for the next 5 years. And like something happens, they're like, we could have done this and we missed this opportunity or we missed the mark. So yeah, I really like the independent part, doing really what you want and who you want to do it with.
The freedom and autonomy is
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, I recommend
Yeah.
everyone try it. It's delicious.
Yeah.
So this is like a secondary question in that area. So, like what was that sort of, because you mentioned that it's a little scary, right? And doing this and reaching out for potential funders, potential grants, or even reaching out with someone to come on and do this podcast. Like I'm always very happy for someone to come on and spend time. I'm happy that you're here to spend time and chat with me and answer my goofy questions. So, for me, it's always when I'm thinking through like, what is this season going to look like? Who do I want to talk to? Will they reach out? Will they reach out in time?
Mm,
It's risky, and a lot of times it's my own money. It's my time I'm taking away from these other areas. I could
yeah.
be watching anime or actually going to a museum or doing something else, right? So could you, share with us sort of that, one of those really early, if not sort of like first like shows that you curated, like what was that experience like? What was the sweat beads like and all of that leading into it?
Yeah, that's funny because I didn't know what a curator was. Coming from in the legal world, there is a term, curador, curator, and a curator in the legal world is
Hmm.
a person, usually a lawyer, but is a person who is designated by a judge to like take care of the finances of a person who is like mentally disabled or like incapable of managing their finances, or maybe children whose parents have died. So that is a curator
Sure.
or a curator, un curador, which, comes from caretaker. Like you take care of, in this case, the finances, the assets of a person because you're not able to do it yourself. And in the art world, usually, like, originally, that's also what it meant. It was the caretaker, the take carer of artworks. There's conservation work, there's archival work, there's, putting away, saving, and making sure that things, last for a long time, curating of artists, making sure that artists are well taken care of. And when I was a nanny, when I was an au pair at first, 2011, I came to this country and I was friends with other nannies from all over the world, a lot of South Americans. And one of my best friends, still today, Eliana Macri, she's an artist. She was an artist and a professor back in Argentina. And in the US, she was a nanny, just like me. I was a lawyer back in my home, and here we are, nannying, which is an incredible job, and it has so much honor, which is not probably recognized as well. But and we met that way because our kids were neighbors. Like, we were neighbors, our kids were friends, so we were forced to be friends, and it worked out. But she was an artist, and she kept painting, and one of her earlier, like, her family was very supportive, or her host family was very supportive of her. She painted, she, was teaching the kids that should take her, to paint. And, like, art was always very much part of her, routine as a nanny. And she was able to connect with the Argentinian embassy. Being from Argentina, her family, her host family, we have contacts, we have connections. And I don't want to speak ill of the Argentinian embassy. I'm not going to say names, but they hung some of her work upside down. Like, some of her work was not hung correctly. They didn't really know what her artwork was about. And me, I was just a friend.
Yeah.
But I knew, what her work was about. I knew the correct way of installing. I knew also, from my previous, learning from my dad. And, I had some knowledge, even if not, like, formally trained. I was just being a friend, and I, would help her write her statements. Like, I need a bio, and like, I don't know. That's also not taught in, art school. Nobody teaches artists how to write, or how to apply for grants, or how to, price your works. And so I helped her on all of that. And she's like, "You are my curator, okay? Like, I just want them to contact you, and you, like, tell them what to do." And I went back home, I was like, "What is a curator?" Googling what does curator in art means. And so that was my earliest experience, I think, at least here in the US. In Venezuela, I kind of always organized concerts, art shows. I had a friend, or have a friend, who used to be a professor of graphic design. And with Amnesty International, I set up a contest, and I was like, okay, like, how do I involve the arts, but about human rights and education? Like, I'm gonna go give a talk, let's talk about, human rights, the state of human rights in the country. And so we did, like, a poster contest, and using all of the knowledge and, tools and all these workshop stuff, we would select a winner, and who was going to be shown or used in a campaign for Amnesty International. So things like that were not as, like, an art exhibition situation. But then, yeah, coming to the city was literally friends who were artists. I'm like, "You're my curator, okay? Like, you deal with that, because you know better than apparently the curator at the embassy." Or the then. I think they've changed in 13 years.
That's great, and thank you. It's good to get that sort of, like, feedback from
Yeah.
folks who have you, like, "Oh, wow, I didn't think that was a thing." Like,
Yeah, I didn't know it was a job. That
right,
was the thing. I didn't know. I didn't have the language, if you don't know what you don't know. So, like, I'm just being a good friend. That's a job. Helping you write a statement, or helping you hang artwork, and making sure, like, maybe show this one next to this one, like, feel like they have a conversation, like, this one, it's not from the same series, like, why, like,
yeah,
making sense of the artist's work. And I was like, well, I guess I'm good at connecting the dots.
right,
And my friends always told me, it's like, "Oh, you know everybody, you're the connector. Like, if you need something, or if you want to do it, like, Fa always knows a person, or knows somebody, and knows someone. Like, Fa's such a connector between, people or concerts. Like, you should go to this place, you could go to this restaurant, tell them Fa sent you, and they'll give you something that's not on the menu." And all my friends are artists,
yeah,
like, I'm just, like, trying to help you. That was a job. Cool. Maybe I can do it.
it's like I get it, and I really dig that, and I have similar values. It might be the air sign thing, I don't know, because I've done interviews with some curators, and I remember one of the earliest ones I did. Dude was like, you're kind of a curator, you know that, right? And I was like, nah. He's like, I was like, that's more rarefied. That's a fine art thing. He's like, no. He's like, you're talking about why this is ordered in this way at this like exhibit that hasn't opened yet. And he was just like, sounds very similar. And having other folks who I've, and not to say that that's the only thing, but he's like, yeah, it's a consideration. And having other folks who, in that vein of knowing where stuff is at, like I try to lead. It's like the Rick Rubin thing. It's like I'm not a musician, but I know my taste. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I've been deemed by some folks as like, you're a culture guy. And I was like, I'll take that. I like that. And it's like, you can go to a city you've never been in. I bet you find the best cup of coffee right there at the sort of spot or where
Yeah.
the vibes are at,
Quite a skill to have. And I think that's where I'm like, oh, maybe it's like all the logical, all of the training in interpretation of the law. Like I was trained to interpret the law
Yeah.
and to sometimes my benefit or the benefit of a client, even if, but like you are able to interpret things. So that training, plus sure, some of the air signs, some of the Aquarius, some of the Gemini, weirdo friends, it all adds up. It's like, oh, this is what I guess that was the job. I didn't know. One of my other friends who was also a nanny, Lulu, he was an au pair with me from France, and he was like, "You've done it all. Like you're a lawyer, but you're also a teacher, but you're also a nanny. But you should be an actress. That way you can do all sorts of roles." I'm like, maybe I should. So I
Loading.
just find like, okay, not gonna go into the actress role or route. I think through curation, like I still am able to like navigate different lives, tell different stories, being able to like participate in like different worlds and being part of, the artist world, whatever they are. I'm like, oh, I can satisfy like my
It's that wanderlust thing, and I get a lot
yeah,
of that in doing these interviews, and coming up on 800 of them,
amazing.
and I joke about them like, man, I talk to people more interested than myself all the time. This is Um, so almost in this sort of juxtaposition, like switching of it. So we talked about sort of one of those early and first like curatorial experiences. Let's talk about the most recent one with recent exhibition Between, Through, Across at the DC Arts Center. Tell us about it. Like it's recently opened, all that good stuff. So let's give us some details.
Yeah, so we just opened on Friday. It's there for a month, so it'll be the closing reception will be Sunday, the 30th of June. So you still have a month to go check it out. And this was a really exciting exhibition because if you see my notes app on the phone, I have just ideas for shows, ideas for even titles. Sometimes I have a title. I'm like, I don't know what the show is about, but I like this, thing or these artists, like, just writing stuff down. So I couldn't tell you like when exactly I came up with the idea for this. It's been just brewing for some time, probably a couple of years, mainly because of my own experience as an immigrant, as a member of one of the fastest growing diasporas in the US, the Venezuelan diaspora. The Venezuela, as artist and friend Waleska Solórzano calls it. And so it's always been like, okay, how do I do a show that is about the experience of a diaspora, of being an extension of a home away from home, and like this sensation of like being a portal between cultures, and how you can exist in multiplicity, how can you be dispersed in your own self, and how multiple things can live through you. So that Between, Through, Across came from like studies and like a lot of research on like the meaning even of diaspora etymologically, and like now in more current and contemporary research and African American studies and Latino studies and Chicano studies, like diaspora has become a more universal way of calling people that have origin somewhere else.
Right.
It didn't used to be the case until like the 60s, where it was more like solidify as a term. So yeah, it's like I was just obsessed. Like, why do we use this word? What does it even mean? Diaspora. I'm like diaspora. I'm like sports. And like it does have a relationship to that, to sports, like things that just fly around and scattered. And I found really interesting how originally the word diaspora, like from Greek, had like a colonization meaning behind it. It was about going out and like colonizing other places, like sitting or sending your seeds, like go and like take over spaces. But it was a translation from a Hebrew word, galut, I don't know how to pronounce it, who that meant like people in exile. It was Jews exiled from Palestine. And in that that Babylonian exile, like that's what it meant for them, being pushed away.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting contrast. And like for some people, diaspora means to go and take space, even if it doesn't belong to you. While for others, or at least originally, was to be pushed away from that space. And that's something as a forced migrant that really resonated. Like, oh, well, I was forced to leave. I didn't choose. And I don't think a lot of people choose to leave. Especially like, places of conflict, spaces of, high risks. But that was just really interesting. Like, oh, how do we speak of our own experience as part of a diaspora, whether it's the African or Asian, Latino, also in a place that is a colonizer, and we somehow ended up here too. So it was just really exciting to read and delve into these themes, talk to the artists, going to their studios. It's also a really special show because the DC Art Center, so this is an exhibition of the curatorial program of DC Art Center. So they have an annual program in which they invite a curator that's a little bit more established and one that's emerging. They pair them together, so it's a year-long collaboration and mentorship. It used to be called the curatorial apprenticeship. Now it's a curatorial program, so it's like more formal, like an education experience and a learning experience for emerging curators, because there's not a lot of those opportunities, who I'm like literally calling Philippa Hughes and other people. I'm like, hi, I don't know how you do what you do. Can I learn? Like, can you be my mentor? And it was hilarious. Philippa Hughes, also incredible artist, curator, cultural ambassador of everything, and like queen of DC in a way. She was like, I don't want to be your mentor. I'd rather be your friend. And I was like, oh my gosh, my heart, like, let's just get coffee. Like, what is that mentorship? Like, oh, let's be friends. We're friends still today. So I'm glad. But they're very far and few in between, or few and far in between opportunities in which you can have access to a curator who's done, some work. Not saying that I'm super established or anything. I'm like, okay, well, I have something, under my belt. And really excited that I got to be paired with Carter Wynn, who is an incredible artist. And actually a year or two ago, I was a juror for a show and she was part of that. So like we've like kind of like been ships in the night, we've been orbiting. And so this program brought us together. She has been learning, coming to studios with me, talking to the artists, learning the process. And then at the end of the year, our roles will switch and she's going to curate a show in October with my assistants. I'll be there to be on the other side. And like, what do you need? Do you need me to look for something? Let me Google this. Let me, be of assistance. And so that's really special too, for the show.
That's amazing. And as and I definitely have a couple more questions around it, but definitely as a few weeks removed from my first almost full year of teaching experience, and you're relearning things. And like, I know this, and it's like, no, you don't,
Yeah.
or pieces of it, and let's dive into it a bit further.
Yeah.
In having that experience and sort of, that time and doing the apprenticeship, this program, what have you, were there any things that you kind of relearned that you were like, I'm solid on this, and it's like I'm revisiting it, and it's like, oh, I'm looking at this differently now.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of it is knowledge that you didn't know you knew, or
Mm,
because it's part of your practice, you're like, oh yeah, this is just, I hang it this way. I don't have to think about it.
Right.
So this was more of an exercise of remembering step by step, of explaining or like justifying, like, oh, but why are you doing this? I'm like, because it's part of my process. Like, oh, because, okay, why is it part of your process? Cart is also a great question asker. She is a paralegal, has been working as a paralegal. I'm like, come on, more legal folks unite. Let's jump into the art world. Very common actually to see a lot of people that are in the arts making this transition. And so I'm like, yeah, there's something about being able to interpret the law, to talk to a very vast array of people, from, victims to perpetrators to judges to like whatever it is. And I mean, it's like a little world. You have
Yeah.
to know a little bit about everything. And so yeah, I guess that transition is kind of, I want to say seamless, but it's like, oh, it makes sense. But yeah, I think it's been a lot of remembering, why am I doing this? Justify. I was like, okay, like, what is a studio visit? I remember her asking, like, what do you do at a studio visit? Like, it's also something so revered. It's like studio visits, like mystical encounters. And in a way, it's like, yes, you're going to somebody's place of work. You have to show respect. You're entering this artist's world.
Yeah.
And so let them take the lead. Like, don't come with your biases or with your preconceptions. Come with your, like, well, you do this. It reminds me of, like, share, of course, but like, let them take the lead, because artists don't often also get the chance to explain themselves
Right.
and to tell you in their own words, what their art is about. And so, like, that's a great opportunity to really understand what they're working. But then at the same time, it's also just visiting someone.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be so mystical and like, oh, intimidating. You're gonna go visit some, like, be a good guest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not as scary when you think about it that way, but how funny it is that, like, within the art, it was like, oh, we're gonna plan a studio visit, like it's this like majestic thing, which it is, but
Yeah.
also it's so normal and ordinary. And so it was a really cool, like, there's like conversations about the meaning of things and the justification of things. And it inspired me to like write a blog. I'm like, maybe I should write about this, like the art of, studio visits.
I mean, there have been in these interviews, there have been some sort of the interviews at the studio, because a lot of them take place in this way, and then there's sort of this sort of post, hey, we should get up, you should check out my studio, we can chop it up, continue this conversation sort of in a different way. It feels very like an honor. It's like, wow, I'm getting invited here.
Yeah.
Or, it's like this is actually where the magic happens. And definitely when I come in, or in the rare instances where I have someone come to my home studio to record, I've got 3 altars in the studio. So it's just like, look, man, got the creative energy here. Don't come in here with your shoes on and they dirty. I don't want that in here.
Absolutely.
So I got like 3 more questions. And so I want to go into sort of the decision making process. Like, obviously we have, and you had your notes app, right? You're describing your notes app. So it's just like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to get it be as grand as possible. These are all of the ideas. How do you delineate, from like, who would be good for the show? What ideas are good? What sort of space? Things of that nature. It can be for the current show, could be for, just general, but how do you really whittle down and refine what that show is going to look like?
Yeah. Well, a lot of research, basically. I think that there's a lot of like what people don't see. You think a curator installs the work, or like you select the artwork and it's there, like done. It's like 85% of the work is done before an exhibition even happens. So studio visits are a great source of inspiration and knowledge, and trying to understand again, like, well, will this make sense with this idea I have? Do your ideas also change the more you talk to artists? You're like, oh, I see something that is fascinating. Like, I didn't see it that way before. I didn't know of such a thing. Maybe I should incorporate this. Maybe I should, ask this artist like what they think, or like who do they like, who are they inspired by? And you start building these, connecting the dots. For this particular show, I already had some artists in mind. And again, for years, I'm like, oh, I want to work with Kathy. I want to work with, Paloma. I really want to like come together with them. And I didn't have the opportunity. So it was kind of like perfect timing. DCAC is like, do you want to do a show? Do you want to be part of this program? I was like, yes, because I have artists in mind already. So in that sense, it was a little easier. Because I didn't have to start like completely from scratch. But seeing, and Carter, was with me in like some of these studio visits and like reading about diaspora and what does it mean and what is it, that connects you to home and like what does memory or like what's the role of memory? What role does it play in like building your identity? And like the hybrids and the, neo selves that you can create for you. It started making sense because people will have different ways of expressing. Some artists had self-portraits, some artists were focused on the landscape, some artists, were using different materials and have video. I'm like, oh, well, like what's the connecting piece is the diasporic experience, being part of a larger community that's extended. It's an extension from something. It's like the roots and the branches. But then to organize the show, it eventually became, more evidence like, oh, like the introduction is the self. So we were using symbolism within the self through portraiture, so self-portraiture. Asha, Ilana Casey did, for example, a self-portraiture of self-portrait of herself and as herself and like as two deities, two Yoruba deities, which was an attempt of her, to recuperate her own heritage, her own African ancestry. And it's like really beautiful. Javed Nayar, who also did a self-portrait, he painted himself as a teenager. He's Pakistani American, born in Queens, New York, and like all of these mixes of yourself. Were, like, how do I be both without having to hide one or the other when, for much of his life, he was, he felt like he needed to hide maybe some parts of himself to be accepted by the larger, society. And so like, I was like, oh, this is like an introduction. It's like symbolism of this dynamic within yourself. Like, how can you live different lives? Then we enter in like the space, the place, the territory. One of like that connection is Kathy Huertas, who is, it's a mix between a landscape painting and a self-portrait. It's actually her from the back. So you can see is her back and she's floating above a painting that she did from memory of Bogota, where she was born in Colombia. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like how much does a place signify where you're from and who you are and like how do you feel in the world? Then we have Paloma Vianney, who has a really striking diptych of Ciudad Juarez on one side of Mexico, and then on the other side, El Paso, Texas. And she was like, I grew up there. It's a border town, and I used to cross the street to go to school. And that relation is like, oh, well, I live in Mexico, I go to school in the United States. It's literally crossing the road. And so that painting is based on photographs that she took like here and then here. It's like, oh my gosh, again, place as this symbolic state of being. Eliana, everybody else, kept playing with either place, the self, or objects. And so there's food trays that Gerardo uses to build a column that looks like it's sustaining the gallery. Rebecca Perez, who deconstructs a bata, which is like a house dress that a lot of Latinas and also a lot of African and Asian women use to like be around the house, do housework. There's different embroidery hoops that Jocelyn Ramirez from the Dominican Republic, she painted over all these everyday objects. Actually, I have a pair of shoes right here. So pairs of shoes, belts, clothes, plants, little things that are just everyday things. Who else? Inga Ada, who has a video in which she actually made a jacket of this like membrane thing, like the dishwasher soap plasticky situation. It's not really plastic, but it dissolves
Yeah.
when you wash. So she actually created that and built a jacket off of this material that she made herself.
Oh, wow.
And then it is washed off of her body. And so like the symbolism again of like an article of clothing that is there to protect you, but is also very vulnerable. Um, and then finally, Elmer, I think that I mentioned all of them. Javed, Asha, Kathy, Paloma, Eliana, Jocelyn, Rebecca, Gerardo, yes, Inga, and then Elmer, who made a banig. Banig is a mat. It's a sleeping mat. Usually in rural places in the Philippines, people sleep on these like woven mats of straw, different plants. And so he drew one out. It's also gigantic. It's like the size of me. It's like over 5 feet tall and like 4 feet wide, with pen and paper. So it's very, very intricate and delicate and so like, yeah, like it's just so specific, so intricate. And yeah, it like also plays into, the object and the symbolism of this object in which, you remember your hometown, you remember your childhood, but memories are so fleeting and ink is permanent.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where it became like, okay, the storyline or like the through line is diaspora, but also like the story goes symbolism of yourself, symbolism of the place, and then symbols of the actual objects and what do they signify for us.
Thank you. I was keeping you honest. I had the
I'm like, oh, I'm talking a lot.
no. I had the DCA AC up, and I was just like, let's make sure we got each one of them. I was like, missing one. You know,
I know, I'm like, oh, there are 10 of them, and I'm all like, one, two, this.
you did it. So that's what matters. Um, so I'm gonna hit you with the heaviest question that I got in this pod, and then I got some rapid fire ones. I've been typing away. I said initially it was a couple. It's several more now. But this is the heavier question, and I think it's a good way to kind of round off everything, right? So heavy question, definitely want your take. How can like arts leaders balance like challenging like dominant narratives? And we've kind of touched on this in different pieces throughout this conversation, but challenge those sort of dominant narratives and uplifting marginalized voices, especially when it comes to who is the right voice, who's considered black enough or brown enough. What are your thoughts in that area? And I say that from this position. I was at an unveiling of a thing about black art not too long ago, and I had a buddy who is black artist, African dude or have you, and he was getting a sort of rejection, and in that rejection, it
Mm,
was, I don't know if your work is black enough, essentially,
yeah.
and it's a weird take, and he felt a way about it, and it made me kind of think about that from me doing these interviews and having those conversations with folks, and I thought I'd get your take.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a loaded question. And I was thinking, I'm like, this feels like it's a response to something, but I don't know what is exactly. I'm like, this is like somebody made a comment. So thank you for sharing. I'm like, what is this response to? And I think there's like many questions within the same one. So I kind of want to break it down. First, the issue of balance. When we speak of balance, it implies that there's multiple issues situated like in equal standing. And that has never been the case ever in history. Like nothing, no two things and more than two things are always in the same, position and have the same value at the same time. So many voices and narratives have been systematically excluded and erased and hidden and just destroyed from actual history, from main, stream discourse. So yeah, like when we're speaking of balance, like I'm not interested in a balance or like the appearance of equality. My
Yeah.
focus is on shifting the weight and highlighting and amplifying stories of people that don't often, get the platforms to do that have been neglected for so long. And that shifting of the weight, it kind of like fixes the imbalances of the past, It's not my interest to like, oh, maybe we should have equal Black stories and white stories. Like, it's been white history forever. Maybe it's somebody else's turn. And that's where, we earlier spoke about, difference of equality and equity. Equity involves recognizing that different groups have different necessities and different opportunities and different starting points. So you need to provide different resources for everybody then to have an equal outcome. And this means giving that extra attention and extra support to stories that have been neglected. And yeah, it's like giving them their due, the respect and the recognition that they deserve. And it's big, like this is what I see as a work of justice, and it's giving people what they deserve. And I think of like Ulpiano, I'm gonna get like old lawyer, but like that's something that you learn very early on, like first thing in law school, like the meaning of justice. And in Venezuela, we study Roman, or like the foundation of a lot of countries is Roman law, and some others in the US is like a mix between Roman and German. But in like the year 200, some guy, Ulpiano, jurist from the Roman Empire, from like Syria, current Lebanon, but it was obviously colonized, it was an empire. He defined justice as, oh my gosh, see if I can remember in Latin, it's like the constant perpetua voluntas sum quique tribuendi. Jus sum quique tribuendi. So like justice is the constant and perpetual desire to give everyone that, what they deserve, what they're entitled to. And so doing this kind of work and not really trying to achieve balance, but actually shifting weights, then you can contribute to a more comprehensive, a more truthful understanding of history. It's about justice to me. Then there's like a thing about, the right voice and whether you are Black or brown enough. I don't think there is a right voice to anything. I think because it is a singular thing, it's going to be impossible. Just like balance, it'll never happen. Because there's no such thing as like a monolithic experience. It's like, oh, well, let's have the white history and the Black history. And then within both of them, there will be millions and billions of stories. So like, how do you balance billions of stories? Like, that's impossible. And then the right voice is also a singular, term. It's also going to be impossible. Art leaders should aim to have as many voices and showcase a wide range of perspectives, because then this acknowledges that there is no one way of being, of doing, of playing, of experiencing life. And, showing this multiplicity of perspectives and narratives, it provides a richer representation of things. It's more interesting, it's more nuanced, and we can be like, it's more exemplary, but it's also more fun. And to be honest, then you escape tokenism, like, oh, well, we're gonna have one Black artist in this sea of white artists, and then you're accused of tokenism. Like, well, then maybe open up your horizons a little bit. And then the part of being Black or brown enough to sell, that's really tough, because it feels reductive. If people are valuing you just on your identity or your appearance, then what? We're just perpetuating this systemic racism, systemic classism, sexism. It's like, oh, the value, like it sounds so like painful to even say Black or brown enough to sell. I think it's problematic to assign, value to somebody based on their identity. And this kind of thinking it's perpetuating the systemic injustice that we've inherited for centuries and millennia. And we just need to divest from that, and maybe even dig deep, why are we then assigning a specific value to what? I feel like there's sometimes trends in the art market that are maybe a response to a backlash and people finally having maybe more opportunities like social media to like put themselves out. There's a lot of, history fixing over time, just as everything is utopia. So I'm like, yeah, like the country or whatever, the state of the world is never perfect, but we can definitely say we're better off than, 30 and 40 and 100 years ago. And so perhaps these trends happen as a result of that, but it's just deeply problematic to still assign people a value based on how you look like.
Yeah.
Also, like it kind of makes us delve into like representational politics. We recently had a woman elected in Mexico, and like just because somebody's a woman doesn't mean that they're gonna have the best intentions for women in their country, or just because somebody's Black. In the mayor of a major city, let's say, doesn't mean his values align with the values of the people of New York, Mayor Adams. So, that also is like, it's problematic to just assign value, but also we can't just assume that somebody will be good or whatever just because they're a woman or because they're Black or because they're Latino. You have to really like dig deeper than that. It's just so superficial. So in that sense, we need to take a deep look into our motivations. In the case of art, people buy art for multiple reasons. Some people buy art as investments, as philanthropy, as money laundering schemes. I, you know, why is this happening? Like, let's try to follow the money and try to figure out, what that is. And maybe, I don't know if we'll ever have like an ethical reawakening, but that is what, is at stake. I buy art because I like it, because I love my friends. Some of these have been like, friends who were like, yo, I'm struggling a little bit. I'm like, yeah, I'll buy it. Also because I like it. I like you. I like this. I like the stories that they, tell. And I can always remember, like, I can point at each of them and be like, this was so and so. It happened here. He told me about this one. I fell on the cliff and he gave me this. Look, this was a gift. Like, it just has so much like an emotional connection. So, like, that's why I buy art.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would question why some other people buy or don't buy or, exhibit artwork. Just buy what you like, buy what you love. That's my advice.
Yeah.
And I'm still encouraged, like despite these kinds of um challenges and silly conversations about who deserves to be shown or not, like who is the right one, like there is space for everybody. And I'm really encouraged by artists who, are coming together and making waves and creating movements throughout. And because they have that ability to like tap into themselves and not just expose their more inner thoughts, but really put a mirror on society and be like, hey, this is what you should be doing. This is what you should not be doing. This is something that I see. Have you considered maybe changing? And artists can help us reconfigure these categories that we have, dumbly and sometimes blindly and sometimes purposefully like falling into, and the tokenism and the biases and all these discrimination. Artists are able to like really just flip the script and make visible what we sometimes don't see. So kudos to all the artists and curators, maybe take that opportunity to amplify those practices and expand on those experiences.
Thank you, and thank you. I'm sitting here like fist pumping. My teeth are out the entire time because I'm smiling. So thank you for that, and that is a really good sentiment and a good spot for us to close on the real questions. And I got like four rapid fire questions. It
Rapid
might be
fire. Oh
six.
gosh, I'm terrible at rapid fire.
No. You'll be great. You'll be great. So as I tell people all the time, don't overthink these. It's like what I said is what I said. This is first thing that pops in your head.
Mhm.
All right. How many hours of sleep do you typically get?
Like 8.
You are lucky. I'm at
Yeah.
6.
Yeah, no, I really try.
Okay. All right. I dig it. Um, could you name the artist that first made you fall in love with art
I mean, dang it.
or piece of work?
I mean, I think it would be music still. When I was very, very little, I had a TV in my room, but anyway, we had TVs in every room. I was like, now I'm like, oh, that's probably not the best, but also very fun. And I was like 3 years old, and I was flipping channels and I saw an opera, and I don't remember which opera it was, but I just like grabbed my blanket and then I just sat in front of it and I just watched it and started crying. And my mom, I remember she come into like she remembers, she tells the stories like, oh my gosh, like I saw fun, like she's just like so yeah, like music in every way. And I don't know what opera that was. She doesn't know either. She just knows that it was an opera and it made me cry. And I knew then and there, I'm like in my 3 tiny-year-old body, I'm like, there is something that's bigger than us. I'm like, it was a spiritual experience, even as a toddler.
That's amazing. Thank you. That's really good. You really set the stage there. I love that. Um, this relates to something you said earlier. Approximately how many mugs do you have?
Mugs. I have way less now, because I did a deep cleanse and then I regretted it because I got rid of so many of the mugs that I had from bars in DC. I used to have like maybe 20-ish that were all from places that I played, like anywhere that I performed, people's houses, bars, clubs, 930, whatever, like DC9. I took some of your mugs. You will miss them. You never notice them. And then I was like, okay, yeah, no, I need to clean. Like, let's minimize. Let's have what we need. So no, I think we now have, uh, I'll say like maybe 10. But I recently I got married, and my husband's, I was my boyfriend and my husband's parents are potters. So we actually have a lot of mugs, but because they make them, they're the special ones.
Okay, this is the last one that I got for you. And I'll preface it by saying a bit. I never know what to wear, right, when I go to an opening, which is why I'm like, "Ugh, I don't have glasses tiny enough or scarves big enough to go to an opening. But I'm always looking for like who really put in some work. And I find that a lot of times curators are like super, super duper fashionable. So how would you describe your fashion sense?
The curatorial. No, I had a really interesting experience when I was trying to like make that switch. Like, am I a lawyer? Like, and I was almost, an ombuds person at the Pan American Health Organization. Like, I was making way to like working as a lawyer or like law adjacent, international human rights, like something. And then I was like, I need to get out of this world. And the thing that made me like realize like maybe I want to change careers. Maybe dreams do change. Like maybe I'm just different. And I like this is not a bad thing. I'm just different because people change. Was because I started giving tours at the Hirshhorn. That was my very first start also in like the art world, so-called art world, museum world. I was a gallery guide at the Hirshhorn. And so you wear all black. That's the uniform. Wear whatever you want, but wear all black, comfy shoes because you're standing and walking a lot. And I remember seeing myself in the mirror with like black leggings, a black, dress on top, and then I had a shawl and I had like my top knot. And I was like, I like looking like this. Like I like wearing this. I feel like I look good and I feel comfortable. And I'm wearing my sneakers and like I can go crazy with my sneakers. I'll have like really funky ones and everything else black. And I was like, this is so much more comfortable and much more fun, even if it's not like the funkiest thing, than wearing a suit and wearing a blazer. And that was a small push. It wasn't the biggest push, but it was a small push. Like maybe I should just change careers because this is how I want to dress. Or I would dress in black. But yeah, very comfortable and black.
That's dope. That's dope. And it's good to hear that. Because like I said, I don't know what to wear, but hearing like, comfortable and black. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
So
I
I'm
think
here for
people
it.
get intimidated. Art can be so intimidated. Our museums, our galleries are, again, historically spaces for the rich, for the wealthy, for the white, for the, for the people who know, like, you don't know this artist. And like, sometimes they make you feel bad. Like, no, I don't know. Like, I don't know everything. Do you know how to like change a diaper? I don't know. It's like, I bet that I know stuff that you don't. And so I'm like always fighting that. Like, don't like come as you are. It's not fancy. I like to sometimes dress up because I don't get, that chance a lot. I'm literally in my sweatpants. You see me right now, with like, oh, my linen white button up, and I'm wearing pajama pants underneath.
As one does.
It's like, yeah, I just have to be comfortable because I'm handling a lot of stuff. And so for the opening, like celebratory, but also comfy.
I love it. So that's kind of it for the pod.
All right.
So there are two things I want to do as we close out here. One, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me. This is just really cool, really fun conversation. And two, I want to invite and encourage you. This is the shameless plug portion. Encourage you to share with the listeners information on the exhibition, where they can find you on social media, website, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to have been invited to the podcast. Thank you so much for this time. You're such an easy conversation, and it's been really fun to be here. Now, for the shameless plug, you can follow me on the grams. My Instagram is my name at Fabiola.R.Delgado. R is my first last name, Rondon, but I just cut it to the R. Delgado, second last name, Latina stuff. Fabiola R. Delgado. Also, that's my email, or, well, yes, it's on my email, but my website, FabiolaRDelgado.com. And yeah, come see the show. Between Through Across is at DC Art Center. You can follow them at DC Art Centers as well on Instagram and the website. It's there until June 30th. We will be having an artist talk on June 23rd. And then the closing celebration is on the 30th. The artist talk is from 3 to 4, June 23rd. Closing reception 30th from 5 to 7.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Fabiola R. Delgado for coming onto the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.